that the Knicks felt they needed to put out an apology.
Yeah,
an apology. When have we? I mean, it's funny. We were talking about it last night, and then I was wondering, when have we ever seen it? We can show you the statement here, right? While we understand that some Knicks fans could be disappointed with tonight's news, we continue to be upbeat, confident in our plans to rebuild the Knicks to compete for a championship. These are the key words, in the future, through the draft, targeted free agents, and continuing to build around our core of young players. It's important to note this was an updated statement because the original failed to mention the core of young players. You grew up a Knicks fan, so I'm going to just twist the knife a little bit more and ask sort of, well, what is the mood, first of all of your, is it what we saw from Stephen A., or is there anybody who is?
No, this is absolute Armageddon, right? Because it's a combination of things. One, the expectations, where we said like a month and a half ago, Zion and AD and KD and everyone's going to be there, and now none of them are here. There's also the case that, you know, them saying that they didn't offer Durant the max. That's a big deal. And, you know, I talked to Ramona after the show. That wasn't something they said to save face after the fact.
Well, it didn't save face.
Well, or as an attempt to save face. That was something that Ramona had heard days before.
They said it on TV 3 days earlier.
Exactly, that they're not going to offer him the max. And the whole thing was, but Scott Perry and Steve Mills were going to try to convince Jim Dolan that this is not Mario Stoudemire, that this is not Joakim Noah, and all those other examples. So I think that part hurts. It's one thing to say we lost Durant, and because we lost Durant, we lost those other guys. It's another thing to say we kind of pushed Durant out the door, and that's immense disappointment. So if you didn't have all that expectation, again, I would say, yeah, you're doing it the right way, building slowly but surely.
What if in 2021 or 2022 there's a Zach Lowe story about how the Knicks turned it around? Because I remember the Cavs, the day that LeBron left in 2010, they began putting it back.
Clarify there.
I know, it happened several times. They began putting it back together the next day. Right. They made a sign and trade for 4 draft picks that they ended up using to get Kevin Love later on. The Knicks have beginning to put the pieces together to make this happen. And I know that this is a disappointing day. I think the Knicks have operated very responsibly for the last 18 months. Yeah. Now, the Porzingis trade, that one's a little bit of a hole, but they did that because they're concerned about Porzingis' health. It was, yes, it was cap space related, but cap space was a byproduct. It wasn't the formal thing. If they thought Kristaps Porzingis was going to be a Hall of Famer,
I think that's a little bit of a retelling. I think
if they think he was going to be a Hall of Famer, they were dumping.
You don't have to think he's a Hall of Famer. That's not it's not binary, right? I think that was an ingredient. I think his health was an ingredient. I think the cap space they thought they were creating for the two guys they thought that they were getting was an ingredient, and we won't know.
I thought the Porzingis trade was a great trade.
And I still do today.
Neither of you can say that yet.
I can say that, Rachel, because
if he goes on to be a great player and doesn't get hurt again, it's not a great trade.
But it's not about that. It's about they got picks out of that deal. They got a young player in Dennis Smith Jr. out of that deal. And you can't say we're going to get Durant and Kyrie in February if you don't have the cap space to make it happen. And they got rid of terrible contracts. Terrible contracts.
I'm sorry, who signed those contracts? Who offered those contracts?
I'm just saying.
Exactly.
If we're talking about that deal.
You don't get credit for cleaning it. If you spill your dinner all over the floor,
and then you clean it up.
You don't get credit for cleaning it up.
I get it.
Oh my God. You cleaned it up. You're amazing.
But you can't dream about those things that they wanted to happen yesterday without cleaning up the mess.
Look, there's 100% a world in which we are looking next year and saying, man, the Knicks got lucky. They got out of Porzingis and it was smart of them and all of that stuff. We just don't know. We don't know. And the fact that Kevin Durant and Kyrie didn't come is part of that narrative, right? Because if they had come, we would have been like, you know what, it doesn't really matter what Porzingis turns into. Right. They got KD and Kyrie out of it. That didn't happen. So now we're a little bit more dependent on evaluating that trade on what happens in Dallas with Porzingis.
And in the meantime, for years, the Knicks remain the league leaders in bad optics.
Well, disappointment
over
too.
and over. Bad optics.
The Nets led the league in bad optics for a long time.
But I think part of it, the timeline is part of it too, right? I mean, the Nets at least can look in the rear view. We're going to have Byron Scott on our primetime show tonight. He led that team. I mean, he was the coach of that team in the finals. Like I mean, the Knicks just can't point to recent history where that's the case. And I think part of the issue is you talk about, hey, the Knicks could be that team in 3 years. I just think there's so many Knicks fans out there who are so sick of talking about tomorrow. And that part of the statement where they say, we're building for the future. How many times as a fan do you have to hear we're building for the future, especially if you're a team that has some exceptionalism, the way we always talk about the Lakers fans? This is New York. It's supposed to be great. So,
but the decisions that they are making do indicate that they are changing.
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
And I guess that's my question. If the whole we weren't going to offer a max to Durant thing hadn't happened, if Durant had just on his own volition say, I'm going to Brooklyn, can you argue with what they did as an alternative?
Yeah.
I think
it's more than
sober.
it's the as we saw with Stephen A. when he completely fell apart last night. It felt like salt in the wound. I think for a lot of fans is what it felt like. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.